Hi, podcast listeners. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. We have so many guests on this show making a difference in our lives, making a difference all around the world with the expertise that they bring. And yet so many of you are reaching out to me saying, you want more. It's not enough just what we're putting on these podcast episodes for you. And so I am here to extend a very warm welcome to you to our Difference Maker community, where you can join for as little as $5 a month to get all this extra content. Out the gate, you're going to get 30 plus minisodes of exclusive content not available for the regular podcast listeners, and an exclusive minisode every month. And you'll get exclusive voting power to help us pick podcast topics and more. And that's at our Changers tier. There's 3 different main tiers and then an extra larger tier. But whatever tier that you join at, you will be included in this extra content. And I know that many of you are wanting to go a little bit deeper. And so even though it gets a little wild in there sometimes because of how deep we go, I want you to join us there. This extra content is very special. It means a great deal to me to be a part of this community with you. And I would love to just exchange ideas or perspectives that you have around these different episodes. And that's the place where we do it. So please show up to our Difference Maker community. Give us $5 out of your pocket every month. And I think that you'll have a lot of fun in there because we do. And I would love for you to join us. So go to patreon.com/A World of Difference to join us there. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Our guest on today's show is a journalist that you may have seen her work. It's Jessica Stone. She is a journalist and an author who is a Washington-based news anchor and correspondent who covers the intersection of politics and business around the world. You have probably seen her work across the U.S. and CBS and Fox stations, but also she's written for the South China Morning Post, USA Today, Washington Times, and a slew of other publications. She has a documentary called Oil Sands at a Crossroads. She's covered the trial of an associate of Osama Bin Laden, the aftermath of the earthquake in Haiti. She covered the second summit between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump in Hanoi, and she has been embedded with the U.S. Army's 10 Mountain Division to cover national presidential elections in Afghanistan. She is a past president and vice president of the White House Foreign Press Group and a member of the White House Correspondents Association. And she has written a course and a book about her cultural learnings called Crossing the Divide. In our Restore series, we really need to discuss how to restore politics and journalism and truth-telling. And so I can't imagine a person to come and talk the cultural nuances of all of that better than the one and only Jessica Stone. And welcome to the A World of Difference podcast today. It's so lovely to have you.
I am really thrilled to be here. I feel like I am going to have a great conversation with a kindred spirit. So I am excited.
Yes. Oh my goodness. We have so much to talk about. But I want to start off with just something kind of lighthearted because we're going to dig deep into some stuff that may be, hard to talk through for some of our listeners because we're going to go there. But do you live in the DC area? Where do you live right now?
I do. Yeah,
Yes.
I live in Northern Virginia.
So yeah, I was just there last week for a board meeting, and we had some delicious food everywhere I went. But my question for you is: do you have a favorite restaurant in the area that you like to go to that any of us who travel there might hit up at some point?
Yes, I have several. There's a Japanese restaurant in Falls Church that I love to go to every year for my birthday for sushi, and it's so pretty. You sit there and you watch it, but they just do really cool, the little smoke that comes up off of the dish, or they do great mixology. And of course, I can't remember the name of the restaurant in the moment, but it's in Falls Church, on Arlington. It's actually technically Arlington, right across from a bookstore and right next to a Turkish restaurant. But I also want to give a shout out to Bamiyan, which is an Afghan restaurant also in Falls Church near the Bailey's Crossroads area, which is it's actually a very large restaurant. And when I covered Afghanistan, I did not go to it beforehand, but I went to it after I came back, and I realized they make their own bread there. They have one of the tandoori ovens underneath the kitchen, and they let me go in and see it. And their food is so wonderful. And we have a majority of the Afghan refugees here And not so ironically, because I don't think that they have the budgets to go there, they wound up living right across the street from Bamiyan restaurant. So, and I've been to Bamiyan. That's where the Buddhas are, the UNESCO World Heritage Site that were
Yeah,
attacked by the Taliban and bombed. And so
right.
um, it's just a beautiful, beautiful area, and kind of encapsulates for me part of the heart that I got for Afghanistan,
Hmm.
and all of its sort of rugged beauty and tragedy. It's very much a Shakespearean tragedy in my mind, and the people are
Hmm.
amazing. So I've had a really
Oh,
good
yeah.
experience with the people there, and look forward to talking about that, yeah, here, because that's a big part of what I'm continue to do in cross cultural work here.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're definitely going to talk a little bit about Afghanistan, but I just share your love for the food. We here in the Bay Area have the largest group of Afghans. Well, before Kabul fell last year, already had the largest group of Afghans in the United States. There's a place called Little Kabul up in Fremont. And even just like last week, we were eating Afghan
Mm,
food with a Guatemalan friend that was meeting us there.
awesome.
And it's just so delicious. Every time I eat the lamb and they have all this wonderful bread and it's so good. And I think America's so great because people come here and they bring their food and we get to enjoy it and we get to love their cultures. And it's true. Like I remember we were in Indonesia when all that stuff was going on with the Buddhas in Afghanistan. And it's like,
Mm,
I don't know, like your heart just breaks for that ancient history that was being removed. And there's so much about what we're going to talk about today with why it's important to understand religions and cultures in enough of a way to work together. But that
mhm,
exactly what you're saying, the beauty and the tragedy of Afghanistan has brought people to our area of the world. And my husband and I have been able to take families to Target and help them get their,
mm,
stuff. And the mayor of Fremont has been great to help give away, money for people who want to take these families around. And my husband does work with
nice.
Afghan refugees here in the area. So we just get to
Oh,
meet a lot
okay.
of them. Yeah, no, it's a wonderful
Yeah.
thing. So, we'll talk a little more about Afghanistan soon, but I just kind of wanted to start off with you have a book and a course that you have written. And what is it
Mhm.
about your life and your work that led you to write Crossing the Divide?
Well, I had often been asked how I sent myself to Afghanistan, because I was a freelance journalist, what they call a stringer, which means you have no safety net at all. And I just felt really compelled to go in 2009. And part of it was economic necessity. Part of it was I was in a part of my life where I could go. I didn't have dependents. I didn't really own anything. I basically had a rent check, and I owned like a beater of a car. So it
Right.
was a good time to go. If
Yeah.
any, it was still a little bit sobering to write my will and give my, and decide where my couch and my car were going to go. But those were my worldly possessions at the time. Maybe like a dresser or something. But so I had been asked several times to do that. And then during the pandemic, I had just left a job at China Global Television. I had worked there for 8 years as their White House correspondent, and I just started to reflect on why it was so hard to be in that very international, very, very racially, ethnically, gender-wise environment. And I realized so much of the conflict and the sense of otherness I felt was because we didn't really talk about how to communicate cross culturally. And there was an unspoken Chinese ethic about how you were supposed to behave, but it wasn't really codified. It was assumed. And most of the people that worked there were not Chinese. And so everybody would sort of insert their own assumptions, and it just got very hairy. And as the only white woman correspondent, I also had the added burden of needing to be very assertive and aggressive outside the building in my job to be
Right.
successful. And when I would bring that same behavior inside, I was reported to HR basically repeatedly for
Right.
being loud, for yelling across the newsroom, which is completely normal in every Western newsroom I've ever been in my entire life. And I didn't cuss out loud. I just raised my voice. Like I was not,
Yeah.
telling people that they
You were
were
well
F
behaved.
bomb, F bomb, this, that. Yeah, by my
Right.
standards, I was. So I really started to process, and writing the book helped me understand that what I had experienced, and why I had been sort of repeatedly told you got to tone it down, was there were times when I needed to tone it down, but there was also a lot of cultural assumptions going on. And again, we never really addressed that. And I thought, you know what? The environment that I worked in, I was privileged to, but people younger than me are going to work in that kind of environment with the added struggle or challenge of doing it virtually. And how are
Mm-hmm.
they going to make these connections? And
Yeah.
how and they need to sort of, at least, if I can't give them all the tools now, at least I can raise awareness to say, listen, you need this. This is not a need to, want to. This is a have to have, or
Mm-hmm.
you will really run up against roadblock after roadblock.
Yeah.
And I think if you interviewed everybody in my newsroom, the African Americans had a very different experience. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of racial assumptions between Chinese and Africans, and then
Mm-hmm.
African Americans.
Yeah.
Being gay in that context has its own connotations. And so there was some really interesting interactions along those lines, especially when
Right.
our gay employees started having families.
Yeah.
Um, so,
Right.
why wasn't there a place for the young mothers to breastfeed and to, or at
Yeah.
least to pump? Like
Right.
that was not part of the ethos. So there was just a lot of, so part of it was therapy. I wrote about
Yeah.
it and I thought, hey, if I can draw a lesson from this and extend it. And then I realized as I was researching sort of how to market the book, like, look, I'm onto something here. The Institute of the Future says that one of the top 10 skills of the future workforce is cross-cultural competency. They want
Yeah.
that. They want empathy. They want collaboration. And all of these things don't work, by the way, if you don't have some knowledge of other cultures
Yep.
and the ability to think, I'm going to adapt the way I communicate and manage. And that doesn't make me less successful because my barometer is not a Western barometer or how I was trained in business school. It's got to be, what's the best way to achieve the goal, and how do I regularly remind my employees and my colleagues, listen, we may have nothing else in common, but we got to get this done.
Yeah.
So maybe you're going to go this, you're going to zig and I'm going to zag. You might run your team differently, but let's see how we can collaborate to be successful, because we all win when we collaborate.
So true. It's so true. There's a book by Erin Meyer. You may have read it, The Culture Map, and it's so helpful. And I
It's
recommended it to a
it's
lot of
next to the
people.
Bible. Where
Yeah,
is it? Yeah,
that's right. I figured.
actually, to be fair to Erin, a lot of my curriculum does rely on her, because as I read it, I was like, aha, that's why that happened. Aha, there was an
Yeah.
assumption that was false. Oh, she has, because as maybe you've already told your viewers and listeners, she maps out the
Mm-hmm.
way different cultures handle communication, management, time management, conflict resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's just, even my assumptions about Chinese management were maybe more based on Japanese ideas of management,
Mm.
and they're actually not really that similar. Even though
Yeah.
they're very close to each other in that part of the world, they are really different in terms of
Yes,
how they manage
they are.
and make decisions. And so, yeah, and like, to be fair, all of us are always running up against assumptions, and I would like to, and I feel like we have a culture in our country right now where it's not okay to be curious and ask questions. It's
Mm.
not okay not to know. We're expected just to
Mm-hmm.
know, especially if you have white privilege. You are expected to just keep your mouth shut and not say, hey, listen, you know what? I don't actually know what your life experience is like. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? So we don't even have a safe place to ask those questions. And I think that's really detrimental to how our workforce can be productive and be innovative and be
Yeah.
collaborative.
Yes, those are absolutely true. And, I think it's so important. The narratives we tell ourselves are so much a part of every culture, right? And the US is so diverse. I mean, that's been the history for a long time. Um, and, especially since the 1700s and all the things that were going on around that time, up until now, there have just been a lot of immigrants coming to these shores and to make a home here, and it's only increasing. Like our demographics for the younger generation, being white is no longer a majority, and so that American narrative, that story that's often whitewashed, is like being for good reason revisited. Here in California, is they're really leading the way
Mm.
here, and a lot of that. But it's not just the narratives of where we came from and our ancestors and all that. And ancestry DNA is like so great for a lot of us to figure out who we actually are, which is wonderful. But it's also like the current moment, the stories we tell ourselves that we get from our various media sources and that type of thing. So, I mean, as a journalist, like, what is your perspective on some of the narratives that Americans are telling themselves, and how you would hope curiosity would start to play into that a little more?
Oh gosh, that is a large question, my friend.
Take it wherever you want.
um, so having been up close and personal with Marxism for 8 years and
Hmm.
really longer because I freelanced for them before I was hired as a staffer, I am just amazed at how much Marxism thinking is already integrated into American culture. And what I mean by that is, collective thinking and groupthink, and a lack of respect for the individual. And yeah, that sort of, hey, I don't know if I should say this. Um, I don't know if I should ask this question. I don't know if it's okay for me not to know something that I couldn't possibly know except reading it because I've had no
Yeah.
exposure to the person, the people, the culture, or the environment. How else can I learn it? And
Hmm.
where is it okay to be curious? So yeah, I'm really astonished. There's an old Chinese proverb, you may have heard it, about the tallest nail will get hammered down. And, the tallest nail is what every American, whether they emigrated here, whether they or immigrated here, whether they, were born here, second, third generation, like we tell our children, you need to be the tallest nail. You need to
Mm,
be an individual. You need to be the one to cure cancer. You need to be the one to build the tallest building.
right.
And so when I see the thinking of, well, no, I don't want to raise my hand because I might get made fun of or bullied because I'm being an individual here. I might have an idea that's not okay in this environment. Um, yeah, that's that's no bueno, folks. That's not a good. That's not a that discourages innovation. It discourages individuality. And so one of the lessons in the book, and I think it's 11, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe it's my last one. I probably did do it my last one, the 20th lesson, is that you don't have to lose your identity to identify with others.
Mm,
I think our culture is telling Gen Z and the Alpha generation, you do. I think they are routinely telling them, you can't hold on to how you were raised or how you grew up thinking. You always have to be evolving outside of that. You can't hold on to any of your traditions and your values. Um, and that's not to say that you shouldn't revisit them, question them. I think you should always
right.
be doing those things. But it is to say that I say cultural competency is not the idea that you are the same or have to believe the same things about life and death, truth or justice as those you interact with. It's the idea that every person has intrinsic value and every person's perspective is important to understand so you can accomplish greater things together than apart.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think that it's a hard thing to pull off as a society. Um, I will say that my years in Singapore, they did a really good job. Nobody's perfect. No government's perfect. No culture's
Yeah.
perfect. There's flaws even in our cultures and how we, may have a cultural value that hurts people, and that's not good, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Singapore has a high value of harmony. I think a lot of Asian cultures do.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this high value. It's the most religiously diverse nation in the world. There's a lot of different languages and foods, and it's just like, it's beautiful. What it ended up being is that everybody could know each other's culture and keep their own and have their own religious holidays, and their own celebrations were highly valued in the government and the society and in the workplace and the schools. And so all that was very valued. I think where I always wanted it to go further was it couldn't go very deep or the harmony might be broken. And so that's the part that was a
Mm.
bit hard sometimes, where it's like, um, if you go too deep into each other's culture and conversation, especially around religion, people might get upset and it would break the harmony. And so, like, on the
Mm-hmm.
one hand, it was awesome to celebrate all that. And I learned so much from Singaporean Christians and Muslims and Hindus and Buddhists and atheists and all of it. Like, I learned so much in those 10 years. But that's the part that always kind of left me feeling a little sad as I kind of tried to go deeper in conversations with people. And I
Yeah.
was able to for the most part, but it seemed a bit countercultural to go that deep, you know? And that's
Yeah,
kind of
I
what you're
think you're
talking
right.
about. Yeah, right.
And I like to go deep. I mean, that's my nature. My husband always
Right.
says, you think a relationship, you can't have a relationship with somebody unless you go deep. I'm like, well, I have friends. Like I don't I'm not I I want to have some substantive exchanges where I learn something from someone and they learn something from me. And I don't think that happens on the surface as easily as it does as you sort of get vulnerable. And I mean, I think that's pretty common sense at this point, but very few of us are encouraged to do that anymore
Hmm.
because it's dangerous.
It
It can
is.
be very
Yeah.
dangerous.
It can, especially in the workplace. I find that here
Yes,
in Silicon Valley, like in the tech companies and things like that, it's like just don't do anything like freedom of expression, but not really,
right.
because of that. And so it's really hard. Then you have what ends up happening is a very surface level of work relationships in order to get things done. But what you're advocating for, and what I wholeheartedly believe too, is that when we bring our full selves, when we actually can do that and we can be curious about someone else and the nuances of how their faith is different, which may be the opposite of what you believe and very offensive at times. Trust me, I've had Muslim friends who've said things to me that just like was hard to like hear, and I'm sure in
Hmm.
Afghanistan you had those experiences too. But some of my deepest relationships were formed with the ability to go there. And I feel like
Yeah.
on a team, if you're trying to accomplish something in tech or have a product that reaches an entire global clientele out there, that the deeper you can go in that aspect on your teams, then I think the more far reaching your product and service is going to be because you're going to have thought through the deeper things. Am I wrong about that?
I mean, I'm on your team on this one, so I don't think so. It's certainly an intimidating ask for people who don't have the maturity or self-awareness to go there, no matter what the topic is. I mean,
Right.
some people haven't done the work on themselves, and so they don't even know what to tell you, and they just kind of freeze up. Um, and then other people, it doesn't matter. And I don't really mean age; I just mean maturity and self-awareness, kind of having done
Mm,
some work on yourself, and that's why I think cross-cultural competency has to start with understanding your own sets of assumptions, your own cultural
mm,
basis. Like I've learned so much about why I am the way I am because I'm a Russian Jew, I'm Swedish, I'm Italian, and that Russian Jew, man, whoo, that's a
yeah.
lot of intellectual firepower. They love to argue, they love to debate.
Yeah.
They've been oppressed, they've been in gulags, like
Yeah.
they really value the freedom of speech that this country offers. And then my Swedish side is kind of like, oh, I don't really want to be too friendly because like eye contact is kind of like not really their thing, and I don't want to
Right.
hug a stranger or smile at somebody. That's what Americans do. Then my
Right.
Italian is just like all bets
It's
are
just
off.
the
I'm
hands
loud. I'm
are, yeah.
gestures everywhere. I have heart disease, and I mean, in my family anyway. But I mean,
Right.
yeah, there are definitely stereotypes for a reason. And
Right.
I joke, but like that whole New York ethos, I like ethnic humor. It's funny because it's true. There's a little piece of it that's true. We have to be able to
Right.
laugh at ourselves. And
Yes.
I get criticism for saying that with
Yeah.
some of my friends, and I'm
Right.
like, guys, like, like if I should be able to make a Jewish joke here and there. I'm Jewish. Like I should be able to make a Christian, a white girl, blonde girl joke here and there. My friends that are of different backgrounds, like I welcome it. I think it's a good way to kind of take some of the negative energy or the anxiety out of the air. But you can't do that in an environment where people are like, oh, I gotta, ooh, 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 walking on eggshells.
Yeah. It's true. Yeah.
And I know people that listen to this will disagree with me, but I just, there's so much funny about human beings. We're really funny.
We are really funny. Yeah. I mean, my husband and I both grew up in international schools, and our kids did up until we moved here. And I would say our environment in international school is a lot like that. Like, because there was no majority, so you kind of all in a
Yeah.
not in an
Well,
SNL
she's
kind of way where
Persian.
us,
She's got,
yeah,
yeah, right.
right. But everybody just
You
kind
know,
of gets made fun of, not in a bullying way. It was just kind of like
yeah.
silly, and we all kind of created this third culture that we were all living in, which was a blend of all our variety of cultures as third culture kids. And so you could kind of do it
Hmm.
very well in that environment. It was nice. Um it was a way to kind of celebrate each other and kind of like, I don't know, like Australians and people from New Zealand are always kind of doing that kind of humor with each other where they're just kind of like,
I love it. There's
yeah.
just no more. And when they do it with the Chinese, it is like oil and water. And I just love to sit
Yeah.
back and watch the fireworks because it's like
Right.
there can't be two more different cultures on the planet in terms of
Yeah, that's so
communication and
true.
joking around.
Yes, although
So
Japanese and American, according to Aaron Meyer, is also in the context of the high context, low context. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I
yeah,
enjoy the cultures and I enjoy the different perspectives, and we become better human beings when we can kind of appreciate that and learn from it and grow from it. We don't all have a corner on how to do the human life in the best way, so it just makes us
yeah,
better. I enjoy it too. Some
yeah.
people though, they get afraid, and there's a lot of fear when it comes to cross-cultural kind of conversations, because people are afraid that if they listen to other people talk about their cultures or their religion, that somehow it's going to diminish their own and they're going to lose themselves. And so how do you help people address that kind of fear when they're going into these conversations at work or wherever?
That's interesting. I don't know if I attribute that to fear so much as maybe a lack of interest or just not knowing they need to be interested.
Mm,
Um, because I feel like when I talk about this with students in particular, it's very well received, but it can be a little bit theoretical. Um, I did find some real solace. And I was listening to the head of DE&I for Google Cloud on a podcast yesterday, and I was so encouraged because she's an African American woman, and she really talked about, hey, listen, I have to regularly upskill my knowledge about other cultures. She said, look, this you can see what I look like. Both sides of my family come from descendant of slaves, but I can't just rest in that identity and understanding that past. I have to learn how the diversity, equity, inclusion issues of our partners in Latin America, in the East Asia Pacific, in Europe, and it gave me just the impression that that there are DE&I professionals who don't just focus on sort of the black white divide part of
right.
DE&I, but also bringing in that cross cultural component, which layered over race, ethnicity, and gender is probably a much better reflection of our planet than just how we look and some of the because within every skin color and every race there are other layers of patterns.
Right.
There's and color doesn't by a long shot tell you what a person's life or background is like. There's so much
Yeah.
more that goes into it. So
Yeah,
i
so true.
I guess I bring that up because I thought that she she gave me hope that people are looking at this much more holistically. And the almighty dollar is a very good motivator to get people, if nothing else will.
Yep, that works.
Tell them, hey, listen, you're much more likely to be hired, paid better, be a better leader, be a more effective leader if you have this skill set.
Yep.
Because I do know, I was talking to a professor this morning. She said, I have a lot of computer science students. They don't want to even learn how to write English. It doesn't matter what you like. They don't care. They don't think they need to know how to do it. They just need to know that their ones and zeros and their programming because that's what they do in their class. They just sit and look at their program. They don't
Right.
talk.
Right.
And I said, but like, but at some point they have to convey the program in a
Right.
white paper to the programming team, and how they communicate it is going to get them closer to an objective and on a timeline on a range of possibilities. And so, yeah, and as the culture map talks about, and as I'm sure you've seen dozens of times in your own life, like time is really a different thing across the planet.
It is. Yes. I know. I grew
So,
up in
and we
Latin
have that sort of
America.
like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, well, I'm just
Caribbean.
glad we made it on time. We could have been, this could have been, you could have met tomorrow, and I just came on today.
That's right. Totally. Well, I lived in Singapore. They put me in shape there for 10 years. So
They did. I'm sure they did. Absolutely.
yes.
Absolutely.
No,
Yeah,
it's
they're
just
good at
it's
that.
fun though. Yeah, I mean, there's just like warm culture, cold culture kind of stuff is always very fascinating, and time orientation is very different. And you see it all converge here in Silicon Valley. Because
I
we
bet
have
you
a
do.
lot of, Latinx workers, even in tech, that's like where it's all happening right there at Google. They've got all these different cultures coming in from South Asia and Latin America and Europe, and it's like you got to figure this out in order to work on a team and do it well here. Um, so, kind of, what are some of your best pieces of advice if somebody's listening and they're in a workplace and they're recognizing that this is a problem, that they don't have the cross cultural skills they need to help their team do their best work? So, what are some of your best pieces of advice for somebody who just really has no idea how to cross cultures at work?
Well, I could be really cheesy and be like, you need to buy this book. It's only
Right.
170 pages and it's full of stories, or 40 pages. Yeah,
Yeah.
40 pages. I should know, right? No, seriously, I think you need there's some great podcasts. There's some great material out there. I highly recommend the Culture Map as well, although that is more academic. I do think it's take a look in the mirror, look at, kind of chart out, and maybe do some interviews with family members, and especially grandparents and great aunts and great uncles. Kind of get some of the family history, if you don't have it already, of what shapes behavior patterns in your family, because that is going to shape your assumptions and your stereotypes and how you operate. And then I
Good.
think that sort of classic picture we have of the cultural iceberg, where there's so much more underneath the water than there is above the water, and recognize you're going to have to invest a lot more time in getting to know the people that you work with and maybe you feel comfortable with. This is a real challenge for me personally, because I am so task driven. I just want to get to it, and all of the what I would call the kumbaya that the Chinese loved to do. Let's go out to dinner, let's go to movies, let's do the Chinese
Right.
dragon dance at the New Year's. And I'm like, what does this have to do with work? And they're like, this has to do with us. And it's like, I'm there, I'm learning, but like, what are we talking about? Anyways, the point of saying that is just understanding you're gonna have to do some things that maybe make you uncomfortable. You have to be willing to be uncomfortable. I think really kind of stepping back and saying, okay, maybe mapping your team, a la culture map, kind of look at, okay, here are my ethnicities, here are my genders, here are my generations, how are things interrelated? And
Mhm.
being, again, as a communicator, I sometimes struggle with communicating differently, in the sense that I default to direct, and direct
Mm.
feels the most comfortable, and direct feels the most efficient. And so anything else feels inefficient,
Mhm.
except when it's really not for someone else's culture. And so I have to continually get over that hump of, yes, I am talking in circles, because that is not my comfort zone, but that is the best way to communicate with this particular friend. I feel like I'm not being direct and honest and forthright. They don't want me to be any of those things, because they will just shut down in my face and not be able to take in the information. So I think there's some humility that you kind of have to have, that there's not one way to do managing, communicating, and also I think the last and biggest deep breath is grace.
Mm.
Grace, grace, grace. Like, try to go out of your way even to kind of stop yourself from reacting and extend grace to yourself, because you're going to
Mhm.
mess up a lot
Yep.
repeatedly, and to the people around you, and be like, I just want you to know I'm not perfect. I'm going to mess up. When I do, and I recognize it, I will tell you that I recognize it. I will apologize. I want you to feel comfortable to do that as well. And it doesn't necessarily mean I'll do it better the next time, but I am going to try,
Right.
because I have my set of assumptions too. Um, because yeah, I mean, I think we hold a lot of our expectations, that you're just going to go into this multicultural environment, and just, even, you're going to read all the books and you're going to take all the training, and you're just going to be super, like, it's a work in progress, just like you are, sister. Like, you gotta, just keep working at it, and let people know that you're human.
Yeah.
You'll have build a lot of loyalty if
Mm.
you're human.
That's so true. It's a good thought. Well, I mean, you also worked as a journalist and covered the White House. How did humanity show up in that wild ride?
Um, well, I think there's some contradictions, quite a few. I covered Obama and Trump. I
Hmm.
covered it always as an international correspondent. No, I guess I covered Obama a little bit for Fox, which was basically, I was the enemy and they were the friend zone. So that was an interesting experience. But then I became the enemy, like all the journalists in the Trump at White House, except
Right.
that was sort of for the cameras. Inside, it was very chummy, chummy. Like, you could walk anywhere. You could go almost anywhere, because they had no idea what the rules were, and what they should be, and where you should not be. So there was, like, if you had a hard pass, yeah, I mean, Secret Service didn't stop you. You just keep on walking.
Wow.
And I'm not suggesting that we all abused that, but we certainly had the run of the place in a way we didn't. prior in prior administrations. And strangely, having worked for a Chinese network, I had a lot more positive interactions than you might think. I did leave partway through the Trump administration, but just the difference in access, where it was very clear that the Trump White House, while they were talking about us being the enemy of the people, were like, "Oh, I got a story for you." Oh, like it was just, if you can imagine water going through a chunk of Swiss cheese, like I've just never seen anything like it. It was a very leaky White House, and a contradictory leaky White House, because everybody had an angle, and it was exhausting. So whereas Obama was very, very buttoned up, and didn't really come back and talk to journalists. And there are all these great stories, and some of these guys that you work alongside from other networks, they've been there since Nixon. There are still people
Wow.
working at the White House who have been there since Nixon, and one of them, I think, is just about to retire for NBC News. I'm pretty sure he was in either the Oval or when the president gave an address to the nation. I don't think it was the one where he quit, but or where he resigned. But it's just wow. Like there's a lot of history there, and that season of my life was really a privilege. I didn't see my kids much,
Yeah.
and I didn't work at the same level as the domestic correspondents. So I often wonder how they. I really do. I don't know. I know that it's not for me at this point in my life. My kids need much more of me than I could give them if I was traveling with the president as often as they need to. But one of the greatest privileges for me was representing the White House Foreign Press Group, which is the subgroup of the White House Correspondents Association that was formed within the last 10 or 12 years. And so the managing inside how to make decisions with this group of very international journalists, and then representing their interests outside. It felt like trying to operate a mini UN, because they had assumptions about democracy that were really more like Greek democracy than like American democracy.
Right.
One person, one vote, instead of any representation whatsoever. It was just a fascinating fly on the wall kind of experience. And so I really enjoyed that. And there are quite a few people from the Trump administration I keep in touch with still, especially on the national security side. There's some really interesting folks, because I think they saw some things with respect to China that were there for anybody to see, but they acted and were willing to go against the flow. And the Biden administration has kept that tact. So that's one thing I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I didn't get yelled at as much as Jim Acosta. So,
Wow. Good for you.
you know, I
That
wasn't
sounds
as much
like,
of a lightning rod either.
yeah,
So
exactly. You didn't poke the bear as much, maybe. I don't know.
that's right.
Yeah. Well, I know that just, I have a new appreciation for journalists, because I've spoken with a couple journalists in the last few months related to, a story I'm involved in. But I think sometimes journalists, we often forget the price of freedom of the press, and how journalists have to pay such a heavy price, not just being away from their families and things like that, but dealing with trauma, going to hard places like Afghanistan. And so, I think my last kind of final big question for you is, what was it like to be a journalist in Afghanistan and be so young as a woman, seeing all that, and how did you take care of yourself as you're trying to process that trauma that you kind of had to live alongside others at the same time?
I don't think I did it all well, and that's certainly when I talk about the assertive, aggressive behavior that I had with the Chinese network. A lot of that was PTSD I didn't recognize I'd had,
Yeah.
as I never really got a diagnosis. But I was there 2 months by myself, working with all new people, always having to look for another story to make a buck. Um, I was like a circus, what is the ringmaster, and then you're in the middle of a war zone, and there's just a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of pressure. Even with my faith, I didn't even always feel at peace to even sit down and pray and like kind of just
Mm.
take a breath.
Yeah.
And I had an exercise routine, but I don't recall that I really had a great like take a breath, time of meditation. Because I was just always worrying, always perseverating, always thinking, what's next, what's next, what's next. Um, and that was I was not a great human when I came back for a number of years. And other people certainly got to observe that, including my husband, who's really a big part of why I'm not that way anymore. But in the moment, I mean, it was exhilarating. It was a privilege to be there. I kind of got there in a very unique way. So I felt really fortunate to be there. I think it really helped inform me much better about the culture and about the mission. And I grew to respect the military in a way I never would have had I not been in their midst when they're doing their thing in the moment, which is unlike anything you see stateside.
Yeah.
I mean, I had never covered them at their best, really. And they're really good people, like bright people, intelligent people, strong people, good leaders, multiple degrees, like just really impressive humans. I wish more of them would get into politics, frankly, and they maybe be able to clean it up because it's not any of those things.
Yeah. No.
And so I'm just really impressed with them and keep those relationships. The Afghans, I'm working on continuing try to mostly just prayer at this point. I have my fixer is the last one to get out, and he's in Pakistan, and we're still trying to get him to Canada. Um, Everybody else is out that I know. Um, but yeah, and then so I did 2 months there, and then I went and did the Haiti earthquake, which was
Yeah.
just heart wrenching and physically demanding in a way that Afghanistan wasn't, just because the weather's so brutally hot, humid, and dry. You know, you're just the hydration issue is very real there. And I wasn't in the
Right.
southern part of Afghanistan, so I didn't enjoy that. But I do remember at the end of Afghanistan, I called my therapist from Kabul, and she's like, "You're calling me all the way from Kabul." I go, "Should I come home?" She's like, "I think you should come home. You're calling me from Kabul." But I needed somebody to just say, "It's time to come home,"
Yeah.
because I didn't have anything to come back to. I was not coming, this was like my Hail Mary pass to make a career change and a professional change and hopefully get some where I wasn't going to get otherwise. And it took I think the challenging thing on a human level is that nobody like said, "Hey, atta girl," when I came back. I mean, my
Yeah.
parents did, and I'm
Right.
fortunate to have parents that do, and not everybody does. So I don't
Right.
say that lightly, but
Right.
I was waiting for, like, trumpets and red carpets and here's your network contract. And
Yeah.
so just, I think their lesson in there is less cross-cultural and just more like, there is a plan for your life, whether you know it or not. And sometimes you got to stick it out, and it's not going to go like clockwork. And you just got to keep, if you really want something, you've got to keep going towards it. But also, like, life's too short to take all your identity from what you do for a living. And I've spent a
Yep.
lot of my life doing that. And I enjoy about Gen Z and millennials that they're really pushing us away from that.
Yeah.
They're asking for what they need. They're giving themselves more room to have work-life balance. And the pandemic has just really woken people up, including myself, to like, hey, I can do my work much more effectively when I'm also able to be a good mom, a good wife,
Yeah.
a good neighbor, a good friend. Gosh, like, yeah, wake up call, right? So,
Yeah.
and mental health is like a huge BFD, as Joe Biden would say. It's a really big deal. So take care of it. Like, get out and get your sunshine. Get out and get your exercise. Pray, meditate, take your quiet space. Yeah, I was just in that I mean, like it's like a combination between fight or flight, hyper alert,
Yeah.
like couldn't get out of it. Just
Yeah.
couldn't break free from, oh, I gotta. And there's a lack of understanding in that headspace that you have, where you're actually not the one that's going to make all those things happen. Sometimes
Right.
those things, whether you believe in God or you don't, I believe in God. I believe God needed to move the puzzle pieces around to be just right for the next step. But even if you don't believe in God, humanity, like, things just don't work like clockwork. The
They
world doesn't
don't.
work that way. It'd be
Yeah.
awfully nice if it did.
It would. It would.
So sometimes you got to hang back and just kind of tread water for a while.
Yeah. It's true. And be kind to yourself, grace, like you said. And This has been such an interesting conversation. I'm definitely going to link your book and your course in the show notes.
Well, thank
What
you.
is your best 30-second pitch on why people should vote? It's coming up soon.
Ooh, I actually had to give this pitch to my next door neighbor. So thank you for an
Okay.
opportunity to do it in person. Um, Whether or not you believe that ultimately the president of the United States or the senator or congressperson controls your destiny, you want a better America, you want a better neighborhood, you want better schools. If you want those things, you have to vote with your vote. You have to say your piece. And when
Mhm.
you can't complain if you don't vote. So get out there and vote. And it can be your best form of political protest. It's certainly the one that is most sanctioned by the Constitution.
It
So take
is.
advantage of it.
Yes, totally agree. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody go out and buy this book, sign up for the course. We all need cross-cultural competency wherever we live and work and play. And so here's a resource for all of us to get better at it. Thanks so much for our conversation today. It was wonderful to have you on.
You bet. Take care. Thanks for your time.
Well, there you have it, Jessica Stone telling all U.S. citizens to get registered to vote because it's a place where you can. And I know everybody's saying this and we say it every time, but this is a very important election. If you care at all about your voice being heard and you have any opinions about your local districts, about your local politics and issues that are going on in your own personal community, whether you live abroad as an expat and are registered to vote somewhere back home, or you are living in the United States right now, it's just a really important time to vote because there are so many issues that affect us personally and people we love and care about. So yeah, register to vote. And check out Jessica's book. We're going to link it in the show notes, and she has a course. I know many of you here at the World of Difference podcast really care deeply about cultures, and I would love to hear your response to the book. And I would love to hear how you interact with it, if you would add anything, if it would be helpful to have a conversation on our Facebook group. Please stop there and tell us how you're interacting with her book and her course, and maybe add some nuance from your perspective. No one doing cross-cultural work anywhere knows everything about every single culture, but a lot of us who enjoy cross-cultural communication and competency really enjoy hearing about the nuances of the different cultures around the world and how that interacts and how we can get better together at making a difference all around the world wherever we are. Love to hear any of your perspectives from wherever you are listening today. The many, many countries represented in the World of Difference podcast listeners, which just makes me smile. I love hearing from each of you. I love what you're learning. I love when you share that in the Facebook group, but also on our Instagram comments and our Facebook page comments or on Twitter. So stop off there and have a little conversation with us. I really enjoy interacting with each of you and hearing your perspectives because really, if there's anything that I just keep learning, and I know each of you feel in various ways, probably something similar, if not exactly this, but I just keep learning when I hear new perspectives on so many things. So Jessica Stone, is one of those people that just helps my brain to think more deeply about a lot of things. I don't think there's anybody out there that I would agree with 100% of the time. So I'm sure Jessica and I might have, some, things that we care very deeply about that we might really disagree on. But I love her open-mindedness, her approach, her forthrightness, and she does come from a particular lens, like she mentioned, we all do. It's really fun if you haven't done it and you have access to do something like this, is to go into your ancestry.com or the DNA, resources that are out there. I know 23andMe, there's so many different ones where people have tried to trace where their ancestors came from. Some people are really shocked to find out. And I just think it's a fun exercise because it helps us know our lens from our ancestors, but also the cultures we grew up in. As a TCK, it's not just my ancestors who formed me, it's the cultures that I lived in, and friends from all around the world that still form me even today. So we're all just this hodgepodge of influences, and we have some choices. So one of the choices we have is to listen to perspectives that are different from our own, and it helps us think deeply and learn and grow. And so that's one of the things I really appreciate about each of you in this community, is that you're helping me get better and you're helping me learn and grow. And I hope that these podcast episodes are doing the same for you, just introducing you to different people that I'm learning from, that I'm enjoying reading their writing or hearing their voice in some way. And I hope you are too. If this is a podcast that you feel like somebody might benefit from hearing, feel free to share it. And if you have any friends that maybe want to listen to previous episodes, always feel free to share those with them. I don't really do that kind of plug very often, but I'm just feeling a little bit today like there are some of us who may be out there who just, there's a perspective that you've heard here from somebody on one of our podcast interviews, well over 100 at this point, that it made you think a little deeply. So if there is any of those episodes and you have a particular person in mind, I'd love to know about that if you ended up sharing it with them. It's a lot of fun to hear those stories. Sometimes you listeners out there share those with me, and it just makes this feel worth it because, podcasting is a lot of fun, but it takes some effort, and I just enjoy knowing that it's making a difference in your life. So I'd love to hear about it and to hear the fun stories about how you're interacting with sharing this information of people that you hear on here with your friends. Anyway, all the stuff about Jessica Stone is, of course, going to be in the show notes. As always, please check out her writing, her work, her documentary, her course, her book, her journalism, and keep learning from her. She's doing great stuff, and I know she'll continue to do great stuff. But also get out there if you're a U.S. citizen and either register to vote if you haven't. If it's you still got a little bit of time. I think it's getting down to the wire in several states. But also get out there and vote. This really matters, and it matters for all of us. We can make a difference together when we make our voices heard, and each of us gets that perspective. And there aren't many times in life where you get to do that, but that's one of them. And I really appreciate it as a citizen of the U.S. who voted overseas for well over 20 years. And it was not always easy to mail that ballot in from Bangladesh, Indonesia, but somehow I did it. It's a little easier these days, but yeah. Get out there and vote if you're a U.S. citizen. We need all of our voices to make a difference. And until next week, take care and keep making a difference wherever you are. Bye, everyone. As we're finishing this episode, if you're thinking, I really wish I could learn more or go a little bit deeper. Well, that's what our Difference Maker community is for. I would love to welcome you in to join the rest of us there. Once again, it's only $5 a month to join, the price of a latte at your local coffee shop. You can join at our Changers tier. Difference Makers is a community that really means so much to me. It's very special because each time I have a guest on the show, I record something outside of what we give to just the regular podcast audience, where we go a little bit deeper. And then I post those video episodes in this community and we can discuss them. But also at the very beginning tier, which is our Changers tier of this community, you'll get exclusive voting power and help pick podcast topics that give us, more of what we want from your perspective. You'll have access to exclusive 30 plus mini-sodes that aren't out there for the general public. And you'll get every month an exclusive monthly bonus mini-sode. At our Groundbreakers level, which is $10 a month, you can join and get all of that, but also priority access to submit questions to the podcast. And you'll get an additional 2 exclusive monthly bonus mini-sodes. And at our Trailblazers tier, which is $15 a month, the price of 3 lattes a month, you can get all of that, plus also 3 exclusive monthly bonus minisodes, and a patron shout out. So I would love for you to join us at any of those tiers. It'll help you come into this community, be in the midst of all of us, other difference makers, and we'd love to hear your perspective. I certainly would. It's a place to engage more with me and the audience around what you like, what you're resonating with, and once again, go deeper with each of our guests. So please join us in this membership community. I would love to hear your perspective and love to share this extra content with you. So show up at patreon.com/a world of difference.